The smell of stale coffee and desperation used to be the perfume of my marriage. Seriously, I spent 10 years in the cubicle farm at Flavor Forge, one of the biggest food firms in the country. It was the place I met my wife, Sarah. It was the place I trained her. It was the place I loved her. And it was the place she stood up from behind her pristine, polished, corner office mahogany desk. A desk I'd basically put her behind, and calmly told me I was done. Fired. Retrenched. Whatever corporate nonsense they used to say. Get out of my sight. She didn't just fire an employee. She fired her husband, the man who had stayed up with her until 2 a.m. revising her pitch decks, the guy who covered for her when she totally botched the Cheesy Delight launch presentation, the one who believed in her when everyone else, including her own damn parents, told her she was wasting her time in data analytics. And she did it with the cold, professional indifference of someone ordering a bad lunch. Her eyes, those big, brown, sparkling eyes I fell in love with over a spilled Diet Coke in the break room, were completely dead. They were just focused on the HR paperwork in front of her. "Kyle," she said, her voice perfectly level, like she'd practiced it 100 times in the mirror. "Given the recent restructuring and necessary budget cuts in the analysis department, your role has been deemed redundant." Redundant. That word hit me harder than a left hook. My role? Redundant? I practically built the analytical framework they were using to decide which new chili flavor to launch next week. I was the bedrock of that whole division. But more than that, I was Kyle. I was her husband. We literally shared a mortgage, a dog named Winston, and a very embarrassing story about a karaoke night involving a broken table and a rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. And here she was, the newly minted regional manager, using me as her first sacrificial lamb to show the higher-ups how tough she could be. I remember thinking, in that bizarre, slow-motion way your brain processes trauma, is she doing this to me? To me, of all people? The air in that corner office, usually a crisp, slightly too cold blast from the dedicated AC unit, suddenly felt thick and suffocating. It smelled faintly of her new, expensive perfume, one she only started wearing after that massive promotion last month, and something else. Something metallic and wrong. It was the smell of betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even argue. I just sat there, looking at the tiny, almost invisible scratch on the surface of her desk, wondering if she got it while angrily moving my old picture frame out of the way. She was waiting for me to react, to plead, to make a scene, because that's the Kyle she knew, the emotional, loud, fiercely loyal guy who'd always stood up for her. But the man sitting there was a ghost. "I'm sorry, Kyle. It wasn't personal," she continued, pushing a document packet across the desk, completely missing the fact that this was the most personal thing that could possibly happen between us. She started rattling off the severance package details, the Cobra information, the exit interview process, all the corporate choreography of kicking someone to the curb. But she didn't know the full picture. She didn't know the bomb I'd already dropped. She didn't know that while she was busy getting her new manager nameplate etched, I was busy making sure the whole house of cards was about to come crashing down. You see, the big promotion she landed wasn't just a win for her. It was a betrayal of everything we stood for, and I had the proof, and I had already filed the report. She thought she was making a power move, clearing out the old guard, which, in this case, was literally her husband, to make room for her new empire. What she was actually doing was handing me the shovel I needed to dig the deepest grave possible for her managerial career, and honestly, for our marriage. The real irony? I was the one who taught her how to play the corporate game. I was the one who coached her on how to deliver that perfectly flat, emotionless tone she was currently using to destroy my life. I trained her to be a killer, and her first kill was me. I picked up the severance packet. The paper felt heavy, like wet concrete. I opened my mouth, not to argue about the job, but just to say something human, something real. I wanted to ask her, "How could you?" But the words caught in my throat. I just looked at her, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at the woman I married anymore. I was looking at a stranger wearing her face, a corporate drone who had traded her soul for a corner office and a bigger paycheck. This is the part of the story where everyone wonders how we even got here. How a couple who were so in sync they could finish each other's terrible food firm slogans ended up on opposite sides of a termination meeting. It's a long road, and I need you all to understand every painful mile. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing crawl, fueled by ambition and desperation. Before I dive into the backstory, into the cubicles, the late nights, and the early days of genuine love and partnership, let me ask you something. I want to know where you are right now watching this. What's the weirdest thing you can see from your current spot? Drop a comment below right now and tell me the time you're watching this. Maybe you're on the bus. Maybe you're sneaking a watch at work. Or maybe you're in a bathtub full of bubbles. Let me know. It helps me feel like I'm not just talking to the empty air. The silence stretched on, thick and awkward. Sarah tapped her polished nail on the desk once. A sharp, nervous little sound. She wanted me to sign something, anything, just to get me out. She needed closure on her budget cut, so she could go back to being the regional manager, the power player. But I was just getting started. I just smiled, a thin, purely professional smile that didn't reach my eyes. I pushed the packet back, unsigned. "Don't worry about the paperwork, Sarah," I finally said, my voice coming out raspy. I cleared my throat, straightened my cheap tie, and stood up. I let my eyes roam over the room, the view of the city, the expensive artwork she picked out last week. I think you'll find that I'm actually quite busy with other internal matters. I didn't wait for her to respond to that ambiguous, loaded statement. I just turned and walked out, leaving the packet and a very confused new regional manager behind me. The office floor was loud with the normal hum of the data analysts, the clicking of keyboards, and the faint, unsettling scent of new, experimental hot sauce wafting from the R&D lab down the hall. Everything was normal, except for the fact that my life had just imploded and the person who struck the match was sleeping in my bed. Well, our bed. For now. That's where the story really begins. Back in the trenches, back when she was just a spark and I was the fire that fueled her. I need to take you back about 6 years, before the corner office, before the fancy perfume, and definitely before the soul-crushing word redundant entered our vocabulary. This is where it all started. The trenches. The setting was the second floor of Flavor Forge, the food firm office, a place that perpetually smelled like a mix of microwave popcorn, despair, and whatever synthetic berry flavor they were testing that week. I was 28, a senior data analyst, already feeling like an old pro. I had my routine. 7:30 a.m. arrival, 2 cups of the criminally bad office coffee, and a morning spent wrestling with spreadsheets that looked like ancient hieroglyphics to anyone else. Then Sarah walked in. It was a Tuesday in early spring. She was fresh out of business school, bright-eyed and terrified. She was hired as a junior marketing analyst, which meant she sat 2 rows over from me, her desk looking suspiciously clean and organized, a clear sign of someone who hadn't been defeated by the chaos yet. I remember seeing her struggling with the ancient office printer, which, for some reason, always decided to jam whenever a newbie tried to use it. It was a rite of passage, like getting lost in the basement archives. I was technically her mentor, though that title meant I was supposed to spend 1 hour a week with her, teaching her the ropes. I ended up spending most of my day watching her through the gap between my monitors, not in a creepy way, but in a I recognize that look of utter confusion way. She was smart, terrifyingly so, but she was new to the corporate politics and the sheer volume of our internal data. She just didn't know how to organize her attack. One afternoon, she was close to tears over the quarterly Spice Index report. It was a beast of a report, one that determined the entire year's production cycle for our snack division. It was notoriously complex, filled with nested macros and legacy code that no one dared touch. She was staring at a screen full of error messages, her hand gripping her mouse like a life raft. I leaned over the cubicle wall, tossing a small bag of our new, experimental dill pickle chips onto her desk. "Breathe, Sarah," I said. "The Spice Index report is powered by ancient gods and bad coding. It doesn't want to work for anyone. Here, try a chip. They taste like regret." She looked up, her face streaked with a little bit of smudged mascara and frustration. Her smile, even then, was electric. It was the kind of smile that could make the fluorescent lights of the office seem warm for a second. "I'm Sarah," she said, even though we'd already been introduced 3 times. "And I think this report is going to be the death of my career before it even starts." "I'm Kyle, and this report is the death of everyone's spirit, eventually. Look, let me show you the secret handshake." I pulled up a chair and spent the next 2 hours with her. I didn't just fix the error. I showed her why the error happened. I walked her through the underlying logic of the database, the shortcuts, the back-end tricks that took me years to master. She wasn't passive. She took notes, asked sharp, insightful questions, and her enthusiasm was infectious. She absorbed information like a sponge in a desert. We started working together constantly, not just the official mentorship hours, but late into the evenings. We'd be the last 2 people on the floor, the cleaning crew pushing their noisy carts around us. Our dinners became lukewarm takeout containers shared over her monitor. Pad thai, greasy pizza, sometimes even just those awful dill pickle chips. We were glued together by the shared stress and the shared passion for turning messy data into clean, actionable strategy. That's the part that I think people who knew us later never understood. We connected over work, not just happy hour or office gossip, but the actual grind. We loved the puzzle. We loved being smarter than the spreadsheet. And the office, this ugly, humming food firm, became our little universe. She was meticulous where I was intuitive. I was the big-picture strategist, the one who could spot trends 3 quarters out. She was the one who could zoom in on a single column of numbers and find the one outlier that proved the whole model was flawed. We were the perfect team, professionally. We covered each other's blind spots. I remember one specific Friday night. We were trying to finalize a huge presentation on the demand forecasting for our new line of organic baby food, a ridiculously stressful project. It was pouring rain outside. The office was pitch black and silent. We hit a wall, totally burned out. I sighed, leaned back in my chair, and looked at her. She was tracing the pattern on her mouse pad, totally defeated. "Okay," I announced, snapping my fingers. 10 minutes. Mandatory stupid joke-telling break. If we can't make the numbers work, we'll make the jokes work. I'll start. I told her my worst corporate joke, something about a CMO walking into a bar, and she laughed so hard she almost fell off her chair. It was a real, unrestrained, wonderful laugh. And in that moment, seeing the stress melt away and her guard drop, I realized my feelings had crossed the professional line long ago. It wasn't just about spreadsheets and market share anymore. It was about her. She looked at me, her eyes soft, still glistening a little from the laughter. "Your jokes are terrible, Kyle," she said, but her voice was warm. "But thank you. I needed that." The rain was tapping against the enormous window behind her. I leaned across the narrow space between our desks, my hand reaching out, not to touch her, but to point to something on her screen. My finger stopped just short of her hand, hovering. She didn't flinch. She just held my gaze and the air crackled. The only sound was the distant hum of the server room and the rain. That's when the mentorship ended and the romance began. It wasn't a grand gesture or a candlelit dinner. It was a silent agreement over a failed baby food forecast, illuminated by the harsh, blue light of a monitor. We stayed there until midnight, not working, not talking about work, just talking about everything else. Her family, my ridiculous goal to one day own a boat, the terrible flavor of the week, and the simple fact that we had both just found our person in the last place either of us expected, the soul-crushing, dill pickle chip-smelling trenches of Flavor Forge. That night, I realized I wasn't just training my junior colleague. I was building a future with a woman who would later sign my pink slip. The irony is so thick, you could spread it on toast. The line between professional support and personal devotion was completely blurred for us, and honestly, I loved it. After that rainy night in the office, Sarah and I were inseparable. We moved in together about 8 months later. The office, Flavor Forge, wasn't just our job. It was the entire foundation of our life together. And I made it my personal mission to see her succeed. I was her silent partner, her secret weapon, the guy behind the curtain, making sure she got every opportunity. My experience at the firm was her cheat sheet. I'd been there long enough to know the political landscape, which VPs liked which buzzwords, and whose loyalty was bought with a good cup of coffee versus a stellar report. I knew, for example, that old Mr. Henderson in finance would only approve a budget if the final slide of the pitch deck had a subtle, historical reference to the Boston Tea Party, his favorite historical event. It was ridiculous, but I knew it, and I passed all that ridiculous, vital intelligence onto Sarah. I didn't just stop at gossip. I actively trained her. I spent our weeknights teaching her advanced financial modeling, the kind of stuff they only teach to high-level analysts. I drilled her on presentation skills, forcing her to stand in front of our cramped living room and present to me while I heckled her with impossible questions, playing the part of the most cynical board member. She'd get frustrated, but she'd always rise to the challenge. She was a natural, but I was polishing the diamond. When the senior strategy analyst role opened up, everyone in our department knew she was the best candidate, but the unspoken truth was that women were rarely given the top analytical roles back then. It was still very much an old boys club, so I got to work. I didn't just recommend her. I engineered her path to the interview. I made sure she was the only analyst on my team's major project that quarter, the Project Phoenix initiative, a massive overhaul of our supply chain logistics. I deliberately took a step back, making sure the entire presentation of our successful work was credited to her. I wrote the key points of her internal memo for the VP of Operations, subtly framing her analysis in the exact language the VP liked. When the interview panel was being set, I used a personal favor with a friend in HR to make sure one of her biggest internal supporters, a woman named Diana, was on the committee. She crushed the interview, of course. She didn't need me to do the actual work, but I gave her the field advantage. When she got the promotion, she came home buzzing, leaping into my arms right there in the hallway. "We did it, Kyle. We did it," she kept saying, burying her face in my shoulder. I remember thinking, in that rush of pure pride, yeah, we did. I never cared about the recognition. Seeing her happy, seeing her career lift off because of my direct support was honestly the greatest professional reward I could imagine. Our success felt entirely mutual, a team effort in the most intimate sense. We were rising together, even if her title was getting shinier than mine. I was happy to stay in my analyst role. I liked the data, the quiet corner of the office. I was the reliable anchor. She was the rising star. This pattern continued for years. When she got her next promotion to team lead, the one that finally got her out of the cubicle farm and into a small, private office, it was the same deal. I helped her restructure her new department's entire reporting process, saving her months of messy trial and error. When a difficult, older colleague tried to derail her projects out of jealousy, I quietly dug up some old data that proved the colleague's own past failures, effectively neutralizing the threat without Sarah even having to get her hands dirty. I was fiercely protective of her ascent. People in the office started calling her the Hurricane because she was a force of nature, moving quickly and efficiently, leaving a path of impressive results behind her. And I, Kyle, was the quiet, unseen meteorologist, tracking the wind patterns and making sure she never hit an unnecessary wall. The money started getting better. We moved to a nicer apartment. We bought Winston, the ridiculous, stubborn bulldog. Life was good, really good. But somewhere in the middle of all those promotions, something subtle started shifting, like a tectonic plate underneath the smooth surface of our relationship. She became less reliant on my advice, which was fine. She was growing. But then she started becoming secretive. Not in a cheating way, I never suspected that, but in a closed-off, professional way. She'd take calls in the other room, whispering. She'd close her office door, even when she was just reading emails. The work, which had been the core of our connection, became the thing that now kept us apart. When she talked about her goals, it was no longer we. It was always I need to, and my strategy, and I deserve. It was small, almost unnoticeable language shifts, but they chipped away at the foundation of our partnership. Our dinners weren't shared over spreadsheets anymore. They were often eaten in silence, as she typed out last-minute emails on her personal work phone. The final straw of the good old days came a year before she fired me, when the highly coveted regional manager position, the one she eventually got, opened up. I was honestly excited for her, thinking this was the pinnacle of what we had worked for. But when I offered to help her prep, to run her through the mock interviews, she smiled politely and said, "That's okay, Kyle. I need to do this one on my own, for my confidence." I respected it. I told myself she was just maturing, spreading her wings. But looking back now, sitting there in her office, after being told I was redundant, I realized that was the moment she cut the cord. She didn't want my help for the biggest prize because, deep down, she didn't want me to have a claim on the victory. She didn't want to share the credit, and she definitely didn't want me to know exactly what she had to do to secure that final, destructive promotion. The shift in our relationship became more apparent as Sarah's ambition began to completely overshadow everything else. The love was still there, I think, but it was suffocated under layers of corporate strategy and her relentless need to climb. I found myself in a bizarre, almost secondary role in our home. The supportive analyst who cheered from the sidelines but was never truly in the game anymore. Our lives started revolving around her work schedule and her stress levels. If she had a big meeting, the whole apartment went silent. If she got a call after hours, I immediately stopped whatever I was doing and muted the TV. I was careful not to leave a single crumb of my own low-level analyst stress near her, because her problems were massive, high stakes, and mine felt petty in comparison. I was still Kyle, the reliable anchor, but the anchor was starting to feel heavy and ignored. The biggest signal that something was truly off was when she started making choices that went against her own moral compass, choices I had actively helped her avoid in the past. At Flavor Forge, we have this unofficial, sacred rule: never sacrifice product quality for margin. We made food, after all. People eat this stuff. Sarah and I used to joke about the crocodile dung sunscreen incident, a disastrous, non-food-related product line the company launched years ago that failed miserably because they cut corners on ingredients. We always promised each other we'd never stoop to that level. But then came the Project Gold Star initiative. This was Sarah's pet project, designed to slash production costs on our massive line of frozen ready meals. She was pushing for a specific, cheaper grade of protein powder to replace the current, slightly more expensive option. From a data standpoint, I knew the numbers worked, but from a product standpoint, it was a clear downgrade. It would change the texture, the flavor, everything. It was a classic corner cut. I brought it up to her one night while we were washing dishes. "Honey, the numbers look great for Gold Star, but we can't use that protein grade," I said, scrubbing a stubborn dollop of sauce off a plate. "It's the crocodile dung sunscreen move, remember? It'll taste worse, and the customer reviews will tank within a month." She stopped rinsing a glass and looked at me, not with the old, playful annoyance, but with a cold, managerial gaze. "Kyle, your analysis is purely based on consumer palatability," she said, using her corporate voice at home. "The cost savings in terms of sheer volume will offset any temporary dip in customer satisfaction. We're talking about a 7-figure saving this quarter. This is what the board wants to see. This is what gets me to the regional manager interview." I stared at her, the water running over my hands. "But you don't want to see it, Sarah. You know it's wrong. It's bad food. It's unethical. Unethical." She laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "No, Kyle. It's business. You've been sitting in the same chair for 6 years. You don't understand the pressure at this level. You have to make sacrifices to move forward." That conversation was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about the protein powder. It was about her dismissing my perspective, my values, and the shared commitment we'd made years ago. The fact that she could prioritize her career trajectory over the quality of the product and our shared ethics was a massive wake-up call. I realized she wasn't just growing. She was fundamentally changing into the kind of person we both used to secretly mock, the ruthless corporate climber who steps on anyone necessary to get ahead. The distance grew rapidly after that. She got more calls from outside the company, whispering into her phone late at night, often closing the bedroom door. When I asked who it was, she'd give a vague answer about a consultant or industry contact. She had always been open about her professional network, but suddenly there were these secretive, high-stakes conversations happening without me. The final, agonizing piece of this puzzle came into play during the lead-up to the regional manager promotion. It was the biggest job available on our floor, and it was a direct line to the VP level. Sarah was openly campaigning for it, working 18-hour days, visibly running on pure adrenaline and ambition. I was still supportive, helping her proofread documents and making sure she ate dinner, but I was also keenly observing her behavior. Her office was directly next to a utility closet, a narrow, dusty space where we kept old cables and emergency paper supplies. That closet was rarely used, but I often went there to grab a few reams of paper for my team. One day, a few weeks before the promotion announcement, I was in the closet, reaching for the last box of toner cartridges on the top shelf. I paused, realizing I could hear Sarah's voice, very clearly, through the thin partition wall of her office. She wasn't on the phone. She was talking to someone in person in her office. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, and laced with a stress I'd never heard before. "I need to be absolutely sure this stays off the books," I heard her hiss. "If anyone finds out I leveraged the Project Gold Star financials before they were officially vetted, I'm done. The promotion is gone. You understand? This is a massive risk. I'm only doing this because you promised me the internal referral to the VP and the backing to get the budget approved." Then a man's voice, deep and smooth, replied, "Relax, Sarah. Your numbers are solid, even if they are optimistic. And my word is gold. You give me the Gold Star data leak, I give you the promotion. It's done. We'll both be rising stars. Just make sure Kyle doesn't catch wind of any of this. That analyst has eyes everywhere." My blood ran cold. The protein powder cut, the one she fought me on, was clearly still tied to her ambition. But worse, She was leveraging pre-vetted internal financial data, which is a massive ethical violation, to buy her promotion with the help of an external party. She was exchanging proprietary, sensitive company data for an internal referral and political favor. It was illegal, unethical, and a total betrayal of the very company that employed us both. And the man knew my name. I didn't hear anything else. I stood frozen in the utility closet, my hands gripping a toner cartridge. The woman I loved, the woman I had helped ascend the ladder, had not just made an unethical choice. She had committed a corporate crime to get the biggest job of her career. And she was actively working to keep me, her own husband and partner, out of the loop. That's when I knew. The marriage was over. It was just a matter of when and how the final curtain would drop. The realization felt like a heavy, cold weight settling deep in my chest. The days that followed my accidental discovery in the utility closet were the most difficult, emotionally draining days of my entire life. I had the smoking gun, the confirmation that my wife, Sarah, had leveraged confidential company data, the financials from Project Gold Star, to secure a political favor and ultimately her huge promotion to regional manager. It wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal and certainly grounds for immediate termination and maybe worse, depending on the severity of the data breach. She was dealing with a third party outside the firm to manipulate the internal promotion process. Suddenly, every secretive phone call, every late night in her office, every cold dismissal of my concerns over Project Gold Star clicked into place. She hadn't been pulling away from me because she was growing. She was pulling away because she was guilty. She was building a massive, career-defining success on a foundation of professional fraud and betrayal, and she knew I wouldn't approve. The problem was that I was trapped in a moral vice. On one side, there was my marriage, my love for Sarah, and the 6 years of history we shared, the future we'd planned, the dog, the mortgage. Turning her in meant destroying her career, our life, and likely sending her into a deep spiral. On the other side was my own integrity, my decade-long commitment to Flavor Forge, and the simple, undeniable fact that what she did was wrong. I was an analyst. I was trained to look at the data and act on the truth, no matter how inconvenient. I tried desperately to talk myself out of it. Maybe I misheard. Maybe Project Gold Star financials meant something else. Maybe it was just an over-aggressive negotiation. I spent 2 solid weeks in a fog, going through the motions at work, sharing the same bed with her, but feeling like I was living with a complete stranger. She was jubilant, practically floating on air. The promotion was officially announced, and she was basking in the congratulations, the new corner office, the power. Every congratulatory hug felt like a stab wound. I watched her interact with our colleagues, the same people I'd been working alongside for years, and she had a new, arrogant swagger. She was condescending to her subordinates, quick to shut down any debate, and she started using this terrible, forced laugh whenever a senior VP made a mediocre joke. Her ambition wasn't just changing her, it was corrupting her. The Sarah I married, the one who cared about the quality of the dill pickle chips and the integrity of the data, was gone. The true turning point came one Friday evening. She came home late, completely exhausted but giddy. She'd been out celebrating with her new executive peers, people who I was clearly not invited to dine with. She collapsed onto the sofa, threw her expensive blazer onto the floor, and looked at me, her eyes glazed over with a mix of exhaustion and high-rolling success. "God, I'm tired," she slurred slightly, reaching for the remote. But it was worth it. They are already talking about me being fast-tracked to VP within 2 years. 2 years, Kyle. No one ever gets there that fast. I sat down next to her. "That's great, Sarah," I said quietly. "But what about the Gold Star protein? Are you still going through with that downgrade?" The report is due next week." Her mood instantly soured. She rolled her eyes, a gesture that used to be cute, but was now genuinely insulting. "Oh my God, Kyle. Are you seriously still on that? It's a done deal. The budget is approved. Stop worrying about the little stuff. This is what you don't understand. You worry about the trees. I'm trying to see the forest." "The trees are what people eat, Sarah," I retorted, keeping my voice low but firm. "And I think you're missing the forest for the dirty deal you made to get this job." She froze. The remote slipped from her hand and clattered on the hardwood floor. Her eyes narrowed, all the celebratory warmth draining out. "What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. I knew I couldn't back down now. "I know about the Gold Star financials. I know you use them, pre-vetting as leverage with some industry contact to get the internal referral. I heard you talking about it in your office." The color drained from her face. It was immediate and total. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to lie. She just stared at me, her face hardening into a mask of pure contempt. "You were eavesdropping on me?" she hissed, leaping up from the sofa. "You're going through my stuff? What the hell? Kyle, are you that jealous of my success? Is that what this is about?" "It's about my conscience, Sarah. You committed an ethical breach, a potential crime. I stood by you for 6 years and helped you build this career with integrity, and you threw it all away for a title. It was a calculated risk." "Everyone does it," she shouted, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "I needed this job, and you, my own husband, are trying to sabotage me because you're still stuck in the analyst cave? You're a disgrace." That was it. The word sabotage. The implication that I was just a jealous analyst trying to bring her down. That accusation, after everything I'd done for her, was the final, devastating blow. I saw the real Sarah, the ruthlessly selfish corporate climber, standing right there in my living room. The woman I loved was truly gone. I didn't argue further. I just stood up, picked up her blazer from the floor, and handed it to her. "I need to think," I said, my voice empty of emotion. "I can't do this right now." I walked into the office down the hall, my home office, not the Flavor Forge one, and closed the door. I knew what I had to do. The decision wasn't about our marriage anymore. That was already dead. The decision was about right and wrong. She was a threat to the company, and more importantly, she was a threat to the core values I held dear. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Flavor Forge internal ethics hotline form. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, knowing that clicking send meant ending not just my wife's career, but potentially my own financial security and our life together. But I had to do it. The integrity of the data and my own soul depended on it. After that explosive fight, with the word sabotage still ringing in my ears, I was left alone in the cold silence of my home office. The air felt charged, metallic, like before a huge thunderstorm. Sarah hadn't come in. She just stayed in the living room, probably stewing, maybe even already plotting her next move. The separation felt final, even though we were just a door away from each other. I sat at my desk, staring at the Flavor Forge internal ethics hotline form on my screen. I was filing an anonymous report, but I knew, given the level of detail I had, they'd be able to narrow down the source quickly. I had enough evidence. The date of the conversation, the specific reference to leveraging the Project Gold Star financials for the promotion, and the mention of an external contact. This wasn't a petty complaint. It was a serious violation of company policy regarding the handling of proprietary data and ethical procurement of a senior role. My hands were shaking, not out of fear, but out of the sheer magnitude of what I was about to do. This was the nuclear option. This didn't just end a professional relationship, it ended my marriage. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Everyone does it. The casual dismissal of integrity, the belief that the rules didn't apply to her new, elevated status, that was the final piece of evidence I needed. She wasn't sorry. She was just annoyed I'd found out. I typed out the report carefully, professionally, using the cold, factual language of an analyst. I removed any trace of personal emotion. It was simply data analyst, anonymous, reporting evidence of a potential breach of proprietary financial data used to secure the regional manager position. Sarah, last name. I made sure to include the specific context of the questionable Project Gold Star data to give them a trail to follow. When I clicked submit, it was less of a relief and more of a heavy, stone-cold finality. I closed the laptop, went into the bedroom, and spent the night sleeping on the sofa with Winston, the bulldog, curled up on my chest, the only silent, non-judgmental comfort I had left. The next few weeks were a surreal, tense, and agonizing masquerade. The promotion was officially hers. Sarah was the new regional manager. She got the corner office with the spectacular view of the city skyline, the executive assistant, the reserved parking spot. She was living her dream, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb I had placed under her mahogany desk. She was different now. She wore sharper suits. Her hair was always perfectly styled, and she had a new, elevated confidence that bordered on arrogance. She started speaking in corporate cliches, talking about synergy and leveraging assets. She also started treating me differently at the office. We had always kept a professional distance, but now she went out of her way to be pointedly, overtly distant. She'd walk right past my cubicle without making eye contact. If we were in the same general meeting, she'd address everyone else but me. It wasn't just professional, it was cold. It was a calculated performance for her new executive peers. She was showing them that she was above her old life, above the analyst trenches, and above her husband, who was still down there with the numbers. I knew she was doing it partly out of anger over our fight, and partly to establish dominance in her new role. I was now a relic of her past, a reminder of the lower-tier analyst she used to be. The irony was that she was making sure she looked tough and ruthless to the company, completely unaware that the company's internal ethics team was already quietly digging into her past, thanks to my report. The silence from the ethics department was deafening, which told me they were doing a very thorough, quiet investigation. They wouldn't move until they had an airtight case, and I knew that could take time. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. I kept my head down, doing my job, waiting. I was a bomb disposal expert, sitting quietly next to the ticking ordnance, waiting for the inevitable detonation. I focused entirely on my work, ironically producing some of the best data analysis of my career. My team was relying on me, and I wasn't going to let Sarah's moral failure derail my own professional reputation. Then, 2 weeks after she officially started in the corner office, I got a bizarre, cryptic email. It was from Sarah's new executive assistant, copied to my direct manager, requesting a formal, one-on-one meeting with the regional manager. Me. Kyle, the senior data analyst. The subject line simply read, "Staffing restructuring. Your role." My heart hammered against my ribs. Staffing restructuring. That was it. She wasn't going to wait for the ethics investigation. She was using her new power to clean house, and I was the first piece of messy history she wanted to dispose of. She was preemptively firing me, her husband, the person who made her career possible, to finalize her break from her old life. The sheer gall of it, the narcissistic cruelty, was breathtaking. I immediately knew what I had to do. I didn't cancel the meeting. I replied with a single, professional sentence. Acknowledged. I will be there at the scheduled time. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't warn my manager. I didn't even mention it to Sarah, who was suddenly polite but distant at home, pretending the fight and the accusation of corporate fraud had never happened. I wanted to see her play the card. I wanted her to look me in the eye and do it. Because I had my own card to play, and I needed her to be completely confident, completely comfortable, and completely unprepared for what came next. The stage was set for the final brutal confrontation, and she didn't even know she was walking into a trap. The morning of the meeting felt charged, like a ticking clock in a quiet room. I went to work dressed in my usual uniform, slightly rumpled chinos, a well-worn button-down shirt, and a tie that had seen better days. I looked like Kyle, the dependable, slightly invisible senior data analyst. I wanted to look exactly like the man she was about to dismiss as redundant and easily disposable. She, of course, was in a perfectly tailored graphite suit, radiating the cold, polished authority of a brand new executive. She didn't speak to me at all that morning. She left early, making sure to slam the apartment door just a little too hard, a clear sign of her own suppressed anger and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of nervousness. She knew this was going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but she was clearly determined to power through it. This was her final, brutal step in cutting ties with her past. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I spent the entire morning running the final reports for my current project, completely focused, completely calm. I needed to be absolutely composed when I walked into that corner office. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the climax of our professional and personal relationship. At 9:58 a.m., I grabbed my notebook, a pen, and nothing else. I didn't take my desk photo of Winston the bulldog. I didn't take my favorite coffee mug. I was preparing to walk out of that building for good, but I was going to do it on my own terms. I knocked once on her imposing, dark wood door. "Come in," her voice commanded. It was perfectly level, stripped of all personal warmth. The manager voice. I walked in, and the first thing that hit me was the sheer size of the room and the view. The sun was streaming in, making the city skyline sparkle. She was already seated, behind her massive, clean desk. Her assistant, a young woman named Chloe, was sitting quietly in the corner, poised with a notepad. It was a formal, intimidating setup, designed to maximize the power dynamic. "Have a seat, Kyle," Sarah said, gesturing to the uncomfortable guest chair directly opposite her. The distance between us, across that desk, felt like an ocean. I sat down. I looked her directly in the eye, not pleadingly, but analytically, like I was trying to read the data on her face. Her expression was hard, professional, and slightly defensive. She was wearing her armor. "Thank you for taking the time, Sarah," I replied, using her first name, but keeping the tone businesslike. She shuffled some papers, the severance packet, I assumed, and cleared her throat. "This won't take long," she began, her tone totally devoid of any personal connection. "As you know, following my promotion to regional manager, I've been tasked with a complete review of our departmental structure, aiming for maximum efficiency and cost savings in the wake of the upcoming fiscal review." She paused, waiting for me to nod or interject. I did neither. I just maintained eye contact. She continued, growing slightly more rigid, as she realized I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Frankly, Kyle, while your long history with the firm is noted, your role as senior data analyst has become redundant. We've decided to consolidate the advanced analytical functions under a new, single platform, outsourcing the execution work to an external firm. Unfortunately, this means your specific skill set is no longer required in-house." The word redundant again. It felt like a deliberate slap. She was making it clear. My value as an employee was zero. She wasn't firing me for the ethical report. She was firing me because she thought she could, because I was just the easiest, most convenient, most personal budget cut she could make to demonstrate her ruthlessness to the executives. I see, I said simply, leaning back slightly in the chair. My calmness seemed to throw her off balance. She was clearly expecting anger, tears, maybe even a confrontation. My composure made her rush her words. This is purely a business decision, Kyle. It's not personal. I've ensured you'll receive a generous severance package, along with a 6-month benefits continuation. Chloe has all the paperwork for you to review and sign. She pushed the thick packet toward me. It felt like she was trying to bribe me for my silence. I didn't touch the packet. Instead, I let my gaze wander around her pristine, new office. It's a beautiful office, Sarah, I said, ignoring the substance of her speech completely. You've worked very hard for it. I remember when we were sharing terrible pad thai over those old, scratched-up cubicles. Remember that? She flinched visibly at the personal mention, her face tightening. Kyle, this is not the time for reminiscing. I need you to focus on the paperwork so we can finalize your exit process efficiently. I am focused, I assured her, still looking at the view. I'm just enjoying the view you got from making those tough choices. The one about sacrificing product quality for margin, for example. The one about using those pre-vetted Project Gold Star financials to get the backing you needed. I watched her face drop. Chloe, the assistant, suddenly looked intensely interested in her own shoes. Sarah's professional veneer shattered. Her eyes went wide, and her jaw dropped slightly. What are you doing? She managed to whisper, her eyes darting nervously toward Chloe. I'm just confirming the reasons for your success, Sarah, I said, bringing my eyes back to hers, the smile gone. The real reasons. It's important to have clarity, especially when discussing a restructuring of personnel. You see, I also remember the conversation you had with that external party, right through the thin wall of the utility closet. I remember the exact promises made. The color returned to her cheeks, but this time, it was a furious, scarlet red. You are officially terminated, effective immediately, Kyle, she spat, her voice rising. Get out of my office, now. Security. She reached for her desk phone, her hand trembling. It was exactly the reaction I needed. A complete, emotional meltdown showing her true colors, all in front of her executive assistant. But before she could even dial, the thick wood door to her corner office swung open, and 2 figures walked in. A stern-faced woman from Human Resources and a tall, impassive man from Corporate Security. They weren't there for me. The sight of the HR representative and the Corporate Security officer walking into the room was the most satisfying, terrifying, and utterly validating moment of my life. Sarah froze mid-reach, her hand hovering over the desk phone, like she'd been zapped with a high-voltage current. The HR representative, a formidable woman named Ms. Davies, whom I recognized from the 6th floor executive offices, gave a sharp, professional nod to me and Chloe, the assistant, before focusing her steel blue eyes entirely on Sarah. Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Davies began, her voice low and cutting through the sudden silence like glass. I almost smirked. Sarah's last name, Reynolds, was now being used against her, in the cold, administrative tone of an internal audit. We need to speak with you immediately regarding an urgent matter concerning the handling of proprietary financial data, specifically the Project Gold Star financials, and certain allegations related to your recent promotion. The blood completely drained from Sarah's face for the second time, but this time, it didn't return in a flush of anger. It just stayed gone. She looked less like a corporate executive and more like a terrified child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. The contrast between her polished suit and her panicked eyes was stark. She tried to regain control, falling back on her rehearsed manager persona. Excuse me? Ms. Davies, you're interrupting a termination meeting. I was just... The termination meeting can wait, Ms. Reynolds. Ms. Davies interrupted smoothly, not breaking eye contact. We are here on the authority of the CEO's office, following an internal ethics report. This is an extremely serious matter, involving alleged communication with unauthorized external parties regarding highly sensitive company data. Mr. Thompson here, she indicated the security officer, a man built like a brick wall, is here to ensure the integrity of the investigation. The security officer took one step forward, planting himself right between Sarah's desk and the door. The message was clear. She wasn't going anywhere. Sarah's eyes finally snapped to mine, filled with pure, unadulterated hatred and dawning realization. The realization that I hadn't been waiting to be fired. I had been waiting for them. She had sealed her fate the second she scheduled this meeting, demonstrating the exact lack of judgment and ethical restraint that the ethics committee was looking for. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this. You filed a report." I simply raised an eyebrow. I didn't need to confess anything. The look on her face confirmed everything Ms. Davies needed to know. The drama in the room was palpable. Chloe, the assistant, was staring at her notepad like it held the secrets of the universe, clearly trying to become one with the woodwork. Ms. Davies continued, holding up a small, sealed plastic evidence bag. "We need to immediately secure your company laptop, your mobile device, and your access badge. This investigation requires your full, immediate cooperation, starting with an interview on the 6th floor." Sarah stood up, her expensive ergonomic chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. She was cornered. Her biggest fear finally materialized, but the ambition and fight were still there. "This is ridiculous," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's just an analyst. He's my husband. He's unstable and clearly retaliating because I was about to fire him. This is a jealous, spousal revenge plot." I watched Ms. Davies process this information. She didn't flinch, didn't show any emotion. She simply glanced at the severance packet still sitting untouched on the desk, and then back at Sarah. "Ms. Reynolds, we received a detailed, credible report 2 weeks ago. Our preliminary investigation has already uncovered communication logs that corroborate the alleged data transfer. The timing of this termination meeting, which you scheduled for the analyst who filed the report, is, frankly, not helping your case. It suggests retaliation." The words retaliation hung in the air, a devastating nail in her professional coffin. She had created the perfect evidence trail of her guilt. She thought she was being smart, preempting the firing. She was just proving the ethics report was justified. I finally spoke, my voice calm, professional, and entirely detached. "For the record, Ms. Davies," I said, addressing the HR manager, not Sarah. "I arrived here at 9:58 a.m. Ms. Reynolds informed me I was being terminated at approximately 10:05 a.m. I have not signed the severance paperwork. I am currently an employee of Flavor Forge, and I am available to provide any assistance required for an ethical investigation." My statement was a critical pivot. I was framing myself as a cooperative, loyal employee, not a jealous ex-husband, and I was making it clear that Sarah's attempt to fire me was an act of retaliation against a whistleblower. Sarah took a step back, hitting the side of her desk. She looked completely defeated. The security officer, Thompson, moved closer to her. "Ms. Reynolds, we need your access badge and devices, please. Now," Ms. Davies repeated, her patience clearly gone. This wasn't the way Sarah had envisioned her spectacular rise. She was supposed to glide to the top, ruthless and untouchable. Instead, she was being unceremoniously escorted out of her dream office, her career, and our marriage, imploding in front of the one person she truly thought she could step on. The silence, thick with shock and shame, was her new reality. The reckoning had finally arrived. The tension in the corner office was thick enough to chew. Sarah was trembling, her expensive blazer suddenly looking like a straitjacket. She finally realized the full scope of the disaster. This wasn't just a tough talk. This was a formal, documented, career-ending investigation led by the highest levels of the company. And I, Cal, the man she was trying to discard, was the key witness. She slowly reached up, unclipped her employee badge, and with a shaky hand, placed it on her immaculate desk. Then she retrieved her sleek, company-issued laptop and phone from their docking stations, the silence broken only by the slight thud of the devices. She did it all mechanically, her eyes darting between Ms. Davies, the security officer, and me, the primary source of her downfall. "I need to contact my lawyer," she finally managed, her voice cracking. The bravado, the corporate hardness, had completely dissolved, replaced by a raw, naked panic. Ms. Davies nodded curtly. "You will have every opportunity, Ms. Reynolds. But first, you will accompany Mr. Thompson and me to the 6th floor. This is an internal matter and requires immediate confidentiality." The security officer, Mr. Thompson, gently but firmly motioned toward the door. Sarah hesitated, taking one last, desperate look at the office she'd traded her integrity for. Her eyes locked onto mine. There was no love, no regret, just a furious, venomous hatred. "You're going to regret this, Kyle," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you're the hero? You're going to be unemployed and divorced, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're a jealous snake." I just looked back at her. I didn't raise my voice, didn't flinch. I kept the same calm, almost bored demeanor I'd used since walking into the office. "I think the data speaks for itself, Sarah," I replied, deliberately using analyst speak. "And I think you'll find that I was protected as a whistleblower long before you scheduled this meeting. I already made my peace with the consequences." That quiet declaration, the fact that I had acted first, was the final psychological blow. She was utterly defeated. She didn't have the last word. She didn't get to be the powerful executive kicking out her underling husband. The timeline proved that I was not a retaliating ex-employee. I was a loyal employee reporting fraud, and she was the retaliator. The security officer placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her toward the door. As they left, Chloe, the executive assistant, practically melted into her chair, her eyes wide with shock and relief that she wasn't part of this disaster. I was left alone in the beautiful corner office. The door clicked shut behind them. The sun was still streaming in. The city skyline was still spectacular, but the air no longer felt charged with betrayal. It felt cleared, like the atmosphere after a huge, necessary storm. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the world Sarah had desperately wanted to conquer. The relief that washed over me was staggering. It wasn't the relief of vengeance. It was the profound, aching relief of having finally done the right thing, regardless of the cost. Ms. Davies re-entered the office, having escorted Sarah and the security officer down the hall. She was still professional, but her demeanor toward me was entirely different now. Respectful, almost deferential. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, carefully using my full, correct name. "Thank you for your honesty and your difficult choice. The information you provided was instrumental. We are taking this very seriously. We've been tracking these external contacts for a few weeks, and your report was the final piece of evidence we needed to move forward decisively." She paused, looking at the untouched severance packet on the desk. "Regarding your employment status, you are certainly not terminated. As an analyst who reported a significant ethical breach, you are now under the highest level of whistleblower protection the firm can offer. We will, in fact, need your cooperation in the coming days." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small, crisp, white business card. "I want you to take the rest of the day off, fully paid. Go home. Don't speak to anyone about this. We will contact you tomorrow morning with a new assignment. You will not be returning to your old team or this floor for the foreseeable future. We need to maintain a separation." She looked at the paperwork Sarah had prepared. "I would recommend shredding that severance package. It is entirely moot." I picked up the packet and looked at it one last time. The physical representation of Sarah's attempt to erase me. I didn't shred it, not immediately. I just held it. "Thank you, Ms. Davies," I said. "I appreciate the support." I didn't stay another moment. I walked out of that corner office, past the stunned look of Chloe, and down the hallway, leaving the 6th floor executive level for the last time. My coworkers were still down on the 2nd floor, still wrestling with their spreadsheets and their lukewarm coffee. I knew the rumors would start immediately. The sight of an executive being escorted out by HR and security was the biggest form of office gossip in the corporate world. I took the elevator down to the lobby, the one that usually only executives were comfortable using. When I reached the ground floor, I walked out into the bright sunlight, a man who had just lost his wife, but saved his soul. I still had my job, my integrity, and a massive, looming mess of a life to sort out. But I was free of the charade. The final, brutal reality was still waiting for her, and she had no idea how completely I had orchestrated her final act. I walked out of the Flavor Forge building and into the bright, busy city street, feeling like I was wearing someone else's skin. The world outside the office, the traffic noise, the hurried footsteps, the smell of street food was the same, but my internal landscape had been utterly rearranged. I had just orchestrated the downfall of the woman I married, a woman I had spent years loving and supporting. The quiet, composed facade I maintained in the corner office finally cracked. I kept walking, not toward the train station, but just walking. I needed to move to process the sheer, stunning finality of it all. I pulled out my phone and looked at her name. Sarah Reynolds, my wife. Now, the subject of a massive corporate fraud investigation, facing professional ruin and potentially legal action, all because of a choice she made and a report I filed. I replayed the scene in my head, the look of pure, cold fury on her face when she realized I was the informant, her frantic, sputtering attempts to fire me, the decisive, almost surgical interruption by HR and security, that feeling, the split second when I knew I was safe and she was trapped, was intoxicatingly powerful. But it was also deeply, profoundly sad. It wasn't a victory. It was an execution of a relationship. I didn't go home right away. I knew she'd be back at the apartment at some point, likely under escort, to collect her personal belongings. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. I found a quiet park bench a few blocks away, sat down, and pulled out the crumpled severance packet she had pushed across the desk, the tangible proof of her betrayal. I opened the packet and looked at the standard paperwork, the termination agreement, the COBRA forms, the final paycheck details. It was all signed by her, Sarah Reynolds, regional manager, confirming my redundancy. It was such a clinical, heartless gesture. She hadn't even had the decency to call me last night and tell me what she was planning or try to talk through our personal situation. She decided to use her new, powerful position to publicly humiliate and discard me. The corporate structure was her weapon, and she intended to use it to wipe me out of her life completely. That realization solidified any lingering doubts I had about the morality of my actions. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator, and I had simply used the rules she taught me to defend myself. The funny thing is, my quiet, calm acceptance was what completely threw her off. When she told me I was fired, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even correct her on the redundancy nonsense. I just sat there listening and then delivered those few loaded lines about the Project Gold Star financials. She was geared up for a fight with her husband, She got an analysis from an informant. My composure, my lack of emotion, was my greatest weapon in that moment. It made her question everything, and it ensured her immediate, panicked meltdown in front of the HR manager. I thought about the future. I had a job, a very secure one now, complete with whistleblower protection. But I didn't have a home, not really. The apartment, the mortgage, the dog, it was all tied up with Sarah Reynolds. That night, I knew I had to make a plan. I had to secure myself, Winston, and start the paperwork for the divorce. It wasn't just a breakup. It was the dissolution of a decade of shared financial and emotional assets, all catalyzed by a massive corporate fraud investigation. I pulled out the business card Ms. Davies had given me. I looked at the name and extension, a direct line to the highest levels of internal affairs. It felt strange, like holding the keys to the kingdom I never wanted to rule. My life had pivoted 180 degrees in 10 minutes, all thanks to that closed-door meeting that Sarah thought she controlled. I called a friend, Mark, who lived across town. "Hey man, it's Kyle," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Hey, what's up? Are you celebrating Sarah's promotion, or what? Heard she's crushing it up there," Mark replied cheerfully. "No. Actually, I need a huge favor. I need a couch for a few weeks, and a place for Winston to crash. Like, starting tonight. My life just imploded." I kept the corporate details vague, just telling him that things with Sarah had ended suddenly and very badly. Mark, bless his heart, didn't ask a single question. "Say no more. The guest room is yours. Bring the little beast. We'll order pizza. You're safe." That simple act of kindness, the immediate and unconditional support, was the first thing that made the stone in my chest loosen a little. I walked back toward the apartment, planning only to grab essentials, and most importantly, Winston. I wouldn't face Sarah there. I'd let the corporate security and her impending doom deal with her first. The realization I couldn't escape was this. I didn't just file a report. I let her walk into the lion's den, knowing exactly what was waiting. I watched her make her final professional mistake, and I calmly watched her career and our marriage disintegrate in the process. It was brutal, it was cold, but it was necessary. She had forced my hand by turning our life into a battlefield, and in the end, I was the better, quieter strategist. I grabbed the keys, walked quickly to the apartment, and let myself in. The place was silent. Too silent. Sarah wasn't back yet. I figured Ms. Davies and Mr. Thompson were still working their way through her initial interview, likely presenting her with the evidence of the data breach and the unauthorized contact. The silence gave me the time I desperately needed. I moved with the detached efficiency of a man dismantling a bomb. I didn't look at the photos on the wall or the little trinkets we'd collected on trips. This was a mission. Grab the essentials and get out. I threw clothes, toiletries, and all my personal documentation, passport, birth certificate, banking records, into a duffel bag. I focused on the practical reality of starting over. The most important task, though, was securing Winston. I found the little bulldog asleep on his favorite armchair. He lifted his head, gave me a lazy, confused look, and then thumped his tail when he realized it was me. He was the one piece of our life together that was pure, uncomplicated love. "Come on, buddy," I whispered, clipping his leash on. "We're going on an adventure." I loaded him into the car, along with my duffel bag and my laptop. As I was about to pull away from the curb, I saw a familiar black, unmarked sedan pull up. It was corporate security. Two people emerged, one of whom was a female guard, and they started heading toward the apartment entrance. They were here for the final, humiliating phase of her corporate departure, collecting the rest of her company property and making sure she couldn't take any more data on the way out. I watched, my stomach twisting as they went inside. I knew she was in the car, likely slumped low in the back seat, driven home to witness the final, physical dissolution of her career. She was probably furious, humiliated, and utterly alone, despite the security escort. It was a bleak end to her perfect rise. I drove across town to Mark's place. The relief of being in a safe, neutral space was immense. Mark was exactly the friend I needed. Non-judgmental, easygoing, and focused on pizza and terrible action movies. He just let me breathe and played enthusiastically with Winston. Later that night, as the adrenaline finally wore off and the silence in Mark's guest room settled in, the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. I realized that the twist in the office, the HR intervention, hadn't actually resolved the main emotional conflict. It had simply moved the war from the professional arena to the personal one. I pulled out my phone and saw a string of texts and missed calls from Sarah. They were mostly aggressive, unhinged, and totally uncharacteristic. "You traitor. You ruined my life. I'll sue you for everything you have." And the simple, chilling, "You're dead to me." There was no apology, no attempt at reconciliation, no acknowledgement of her own guilt. It was all external blame, a torrent of pure, furious ego. The final text, sent around midnight, was the most telling. "I worked so hard, Kyle. You didn't understand the pressure. I was protecting us. I was getting us rich. Why would you sabotage your own family for a company?" I read that last one over and over. Protecting us. Getting us rich. It was her distorted view of reality. She truly believed that committing fraud for a bigger title was an act of love, and my reporting her was the betrayal. She completely missed the point. The promotion wasn't the goal. The integrity of the work was. We built our relationship on integrity, and she sacrificed it for power. I picked up the untouched severance packet again, the one she signed. I pulled out my pen and wrote a single line across the back of the envelope, sealing it. I filed the report before I received this. This was never about retaliation, Sarah. It was about right and wrong. You fired the wrong person. I put the packet back down. It was my final, internal communication to the woman I used to love. I would send it to her lawyer, a piece of irrefutable, dated evidence proving my actions were taken as a dedicated, ethical employee, not as a spurned husband. The job was secure. My conscience was clear, but the marriage was gone, reduced to a piece of damning paper evidence. The next morning, Ms. Davies called me precisely at 8:30 a.m. "Mr. Reynolds, we need you on the 7th floor. Starting immediately," she said. "You'll be working directly with the internal audit team for the duration of this investigation. Your analyst experience is invaluable, and your security clearance is now elevated. You won't be seeing your old team for a while, but your title and salary have been adjusted to reflect your new, critical role. Welcome to Internal Affairs." I hung up the phone, looked at Winston, who was already settling comfortably into his new life, and felt a quiet, profound sense of resolve. I had lost my wife and my old life, but I had gained my integrity, my career, and the clear knowledge that I had fought for what was right. The climb to the top wasn't worth the sacrifice if you had to betray your own soul to get there. I was sitting in a new, sterile, windowless office on the 7th floor, the exclusive domain of internal audit and legal, the next morning. My name was now attached to a sensitive, high-profile case of corporate fraud. I was no longer an analyst. I was a key resource, a protected witness, and an employee with a new, temporary mission. The irony of being on the internal audit team, the very team investigating my wife, Sarah Reynolds, was not lost on me. It was the ultimate, perverse closure. Ms. Davies, the head of internal affairs, assigned me to a quiet, meticulous auditor named Mr. Chun. My job was simple. Use my deep knowledge of the company's data structure and Sarah's working habits to help them trace the exact proprietary financials she leaked and identify the external contact she was leveraging. My decade in the trenches, the very experience she deemed redundant, was now the most critical asset the company possessed. Your detailed knowledge of the Project Gold Star data is what we need, Kyle, Mr. Chin explained, pointing to a massive flowchart on a whiteboard. We need to know what was leaked and who on the outside would have the influence to broker an internal promotion based on that specific financial gain. You were her partner. You know her network better than anyone. And I did. I knew the whispers, the vague names, the industry contacts she'd been speaking to late at night. I spent the next 3 days in that quiet office, working with Mr. Chun, pulling up data trails, communication logs, and analyzing the optimistic projections she had used. It turned out she hadn't just leaked preliminary data. She had provided manipulated, future tense projections of the cost savings from the protein powder switch, projections that were highly favorable and completely unvetted, to a powerful competitor's consultant who promised her the leverage she needed. It was far worse than I originally thought. The competitor was planning to short sell our stock based on the fabricated success of the project. This wasn't just an ethical breach. It was a potentially devastating market manipulation scheme. Meanwhile, news of Sarah's sudden and spectacular fall spread through the company like wildfire. Executives escorted out by security are never quiet, no matter how much HR tries to control the narrative. The official line was a personnel issue and involvement in an ongoing corporate investigation, but the whispers were loud and clear. Fraud, data breach, and misuse of power. I avoided all contact with her. I stayed at Mark's place, working long hours on the 7th floor. I hired a lawyer, and he filed the divorce papers, serving her at the last known address, our apartment. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, used the sealed severance packet as key evidence. The line I wrote on the back, I filed the report before I received this. This was never about retaliation, Sarah. It was about right and wrong. You fired the wrong person, was dated and provided irrefutable proof that her attempt to terminate me was clear-cut whistleblower retaliation. This protected my financial assets and cemented my standing within Flavor Forge. The final, cold revelation came a week later. Mr. Chun and I had finally identified the external contact, a former senior executive at a rival food firm, notorious for his ruthless tactics, who was now an influential, if somewhat shady, industry consultant. The next piece of the puzzle, however, was the real kicker. The internal referral she leveraged wasn't just a political favor. It was a direct payment to the consultant, a massive cash transfer to influence the committee. It was a clear bribe. Mr. Chin looked up from his screen, pushing his glasses up his nose. It wasn't just an exchange of data for a referral, Kyle, he said quietly. Your wife took a massive financial bribe to leak those numbers, an illegal payment funneled through the consultant. She sold us out for cash and the title. The greed was staggering. She didn't just sacrifice her integrity for a title. She did it for a secret, illegal payday. That revelation, more than the firing, more than the betrayal, was the final, devastating nail in the coffin of my feelings for her. She hadn't been protecting us. She was purely, selfishly lining her own pockets. The divorce was quick and quiet, at least on my side. I gave her the apartment and the debt, took Winston, and kept my now elevated, protected job. I walked away with clean hands and a clear conscience. I had lost a wife, but I hadn't lost myself. The ultimate resolution was delivered not by me, but by Ms. Davies. The final report was concluded. Sarah was not only terminated, but Flavor Forge filed a civil suit against her and the consultant for damages related to the market manipulation attempt. Her career was over. Her name was mud in the industry, and she faced a long, expensive legal battle. The morning I received my transfer confirmation back to my old department as the new senior lead analyst, I found a small package on my old, familiar desk. It was an executive card from Ms. Davies, a formal thanks for my integrity and loyalty, and inside was a promotion letter detailing my new title and a substantial raise. The career I had built was safe, fortified by my own ethics. The woman who tried to dismantle my life was paying the ultimate price for her ambition. I looked around my familiar cubicle, picked up my favorite, slightly chipped coffee mug, and smiled. I was back in the trenches, but this time I was leading, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was Kyle,